Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hey Joe Show. Erin, good evening.
Good evening and hello. I haven't seen you all weekend.
I know the reality is I got in about, an hour ago
maybe.
From Missouri and had a wonderful weekend there with a wonderful group of Christians. And I'm glad that we made it back safe. Glad that you guys were safe, obviously. But yeah, If you're tuning in tonight, you got to understand Erin and I have spent maybe a whole 20 minutes talking. Maybe. That's right. Is it too loud?
No, but it's fine.
Okay, very good. I'm just sitting here going, okay, I'm trying to read facial. So we seem to be good. Okay, very good. All right, so we want to welcome you, as we always do, and obviously thank the folks over at the lightnetwork.tv. And people ask from time to time if there is a good podcast network that they can be a part of. And of course, I may be a little biased, but I think that the lightnetwork.tv is a wonderful family of podcasts to tune into. And of course, if you have not tuned into that, you need to. And there are other great resources out there, but this is one that could be a tremendous blessing to teenagers and to their families. And so check out the lightnetwork.tv and also check out truth.fm. And of course, the Hey Joe Show, wherever your favorite podcast sourcing comes from, check that out as well. So here's the deal, Erin. Tonight, we are going to deal with a subject, obviously pertinent to the pandemic. We're going to deal with the subject of...
What's our subject?
The eating disorders. Now, those of you who are tuning in on social media, you know that the issue of the pandemic has been something that we've tried to address and tried to talk about when it comes to the effects that the pandemic has had on not only culture, but also in family units and so forth. And so as we look at a continuation of understanding that the pandemic really has had multiple fronts that battles have been fought on, that individuals have suffered at, you begin to notice that not only has there been an economic talk, not only has there been the issue of the physical health and well-being itself, but you also have to understand the mental and emotional aspect to what is going on with the effects of the pandemic. And so tonight, what we're going to address is something I thought was quite interesting in an article that I read in dealing with the eating disorders and the effect that the pandemic has had on eating disorders. And so what we're going to do is I want to read this, if you don't mind. So Camden, zoom into me, buddy, over here. And I wanted you to just kind of to tune in and listen to a portion of this article. But here's what it says, the title of the article, and of course, it will be in the show notes. And so you can check that out at the lightnetwork.tv. But here's the title of the article, Eating Disorders Among Teens Surging During the Pandemic. And I think it's quite interesting that it doesn't address it from a standpoint of maybe it's growing, maybe it's not growing, but it says it's surging. And here's what it says. Since the pandemic began, isolation, anxiety, and hours upon hours of screen time have led to a surge in eating disorders among adolescents. At the same time, that health education has been cut back in classrooms. Now, here's what I want you to know. According to the National Eating Disorder Association, calls to their hotline have increased 40% since March of 2020. 40%. As a matter of fact, a study released last week, of course, this article came out, let me see here, March 11th. So that wasn't long ago, just a few days. A study released last week shows that more time spent on social media or watching TV, or that the more time students spend on social media or watching TV, the more likely they are to engage in uncontrolled eating or binging. Now, let's just pause there for a moment. And maybe, some of you who are watching online tonight, maybe you would have some comments that you would like to add to the discussion. But here's where we're at on this. Obviously, we know that as individuals went to a virtual style of learning, as individuals started spending more time inside, less time outside and with people, there became the reality of a sedimentary life. In other words, this idea that individuals were not going to be out as much, they weren't going to be moving as much. And so what happened was, through this whole concept, it obviously the less mobile you are, the less involved you are in various activities, the more we will see an impact of that. But here's the deal. When you start talking about eating disorders, we're not talking about what was called the quarantine 15. That's not the basis of an eating disorder. An eating disorder is not an individual who puts on weight during a time period where they're not spending as much time out and about and being active. That's not what this is. An eating disorder is a way to cope with the emotional and mental effects of such. And so when you and I look at this, what we've got to understand is that as hotline calls increased by 40% to the National Eating Disorder Association, that increase wasn't because people put on weight. That increase was because they were dealing with the isolation and the anxiety that this pandemic caused, I guess is the best way to say that. And so when you really start looking at it, you've got to start going, wait a minute then. If the calls increased by 40%, is it possible then that we've seen an uptick in the effects from a mental and emotional side of dealing with the pandemic? And if your answer to that is yes, then you are absolutely correct. As a matter of fact, those who are counselors that I've spoken to directly, they have told me that their caseload, especially in dealing with children and dealing with underage children, that actually it has exploded. I hate to use that word, but it has increased significantly when you start talking about young people who aren't sure how to deal with the isolation. They're not sure how to deal with being taken away from friends. And look, the reality is I would like to think that most of us believe our homes provide everything that our children need. And perhaps a good portion of the listeners to the Hey Joe Show, that is the case. However, not every home is the same. And some homes don't provide the support, and some homes don't provide the love and the care and the affection and the attention that other homes do. And so outlets are things like sports, and they're things like school friend groups or teachers who have poured themselves into those students. And the reality is, during the pandemic, all of that was taken away. Now, we tried to stay connected. That's why I firmly believe that screen time increased. Not only was it an issue dealing with online schooling, but we also saw an increase in video gaming, saw an increase in social media usage, saw an increase in texting, saw an increase in shows and binge watching shows on certain streaming services. And so all of that was this. We have all this time. Our young people have all this time. What are they going to do with it? Now, here's the deal. Some individuals maybe handled it in a positive manner. Perhaps they used this time to grow closer to their families, to grow closer to God through personal Bible study. Some individuals, though, we know for a fact struggled with things like suicide, struggled with things like depression. The increase in teen suicide, the increase in teen depression, all of these signs are pointing to young people are struggling in dealing with the uncertainties that exist surrounding this pandemic. And I don't believe, though, that this pandemic all of a sudden brought this on. Now, here's where I'm going. And, of course, Erin, you feel free to chime in. I obviously want you to know always you can stop me in my tracks. And make comments.
It's supposed to happen just when I walk in the room.
Oh, it does. It does. But obviously, I want to hear from you. I want to hear what people have to say online. So, but here's the deal. When we start looking at the effects of this, I told you I don't believe necessarily that the pandemic brought this on. I do believe that the pandemic sped it up. The pandemic magnified it. In other words, my statement is there was already an issue here. but the pandemic only made that issue come to the surface and in a major, major way. Now, here's what I mean by that. You see, the same studies that are out that talk about teen depression, there are also other studies out there that talk about self-esteem problems amongst teenagers. And, of course, if you've listened to the Hey Joe Show any amount of time, you've heard me say, you've heard perhaps others say, and those that you watch, perhaps studies, that teenagers are going through uncertain times anyway. And so as hormones are raging, as mindsets and ideas are developing, there is a sense of everybody's watching me. I have to be perfect. I have to look great. And when you compound that with social media and the issue of likes and comments and cyberbullying and apps that talk about whether or not that person who posts a picture is hot or not, which, by the way, hot, I don't know where that ever came to mean good looking, but if you know the background behind that word, there's something you can comment on. But the idea behind that is this: we live in a day and age where your public image is not just everything, but it's everywhere. And when you really start thinking about the pressure upon people with their public image and what will people think about them and how do they view them, you start to only compound the stress, right? So an individual who was already feeling stressed or already feeling like they were not worthy, they had low self-esteem, then you add to that a society where everything you do can be captured on camera, posted on social media, going out for hundreds, if not thousands of people to see, and you start really adding pressure. Now, here's what the article says, and this is something that maybe, Erin, you'd want to chime in. Maybe you don't, right? But the article says this: selfie image problem. 9 in 10 young women edit, filter photos before posting them online.
Agree.
9 out of 10.
I think that's a lie. I think it's 10 out of 10. No.
Well, and maybe it is.
No, 9 out of 10 is probably correct.
Maybe it is. But what they're getting at, and this is an overwhelming percentage of individuals. Now, I remember back when the day was when we had the Polaroid cameras, right?
What?
Yeah, I know, the Polaroids, which are coming back.
I was going to say, no, those have been popular.
Yeah, you know what's funny, Erin? We were, of course, everybody knows that you are a travel agent.
Everybody knows.
Everybody does now. All the 3 listeners to the Hey Joe Show.
Hang on.
You're a travel agent. You specialize in Universal, Disney, cruises, things along those lines, right? Well, we were recently out somewhere, and I actually saw a father taking pictures of his family with a Polaroid camera.
That's fun.
And he would take the little Polaroid picture off. He would obviously leave it out a little bit, and then he would put it away so it can continue to develop. So not only are they coming back, it's like if you own one of the original Polaroid cameras, you're cool now.
Hey, guess what? Oh, wait, no, we don't have one.
We don't have one,
but
can you imagine? Can you imagine how cool, more cool we would be if we had a Polaroid camera, right? So here's the deal, though. As you and I think about those days.
But we're not that old.
We're not that old. We don't even know what a Polaroid is. I'm just saying that for research purposes, right? But when you really start looking at it, there was a time period when pictures were taken of people and you could not edit them.
Hey, Joe, I think we have an issue. It says that our live video has ended, but I'm not sure if that is correct. So I hate to
I'm not sure. You're looking at the producer of the show.
No. Okay, so you just keep talking.
No, I will keep talking.
We'll pretend like everything's fine,
it.
And I'm just going to excuse myself here to go see what's going on.
There you go. That'll work. So here's the deal. There was a time when pictures could not be touched up. Now, I know somebody's going to say, well, Joe, in that dark room, people could go in or they could add this, they could add that. But on the whole, when an individual took pictures, you got what you got. If you didn't like the color of your skin, then that's just too bad. That's what you got. or maybe your hair was out of alignment, maybe your makeup wasn't on right, perhaps your teeth weren't the color that you wanted them. Well, the reality was this: that was a time period when the pictures were accepted as being accurate representations of who we were. Now, I remember those times, and I remember looking back at pictures, and you're going, wow, if that existed today, that wouldn't be there. Or if somebody even posted on social media, perhaps it goes through an editing program so that we don't present who we actually are. We present what we want other people to see. Now, I get it, right? Those who take photographs, they edit all the time. And we do that because we want that perfect image captured to hang on our wall or to remember, right? And most of us don't have a problem with that. However, those who study society, those who study culture, those who look at the impact from an emotional and a mental concept, they're seeing this self-image problem that really does manifest itself perhaps in ways that we didn't have available to us before, because I didn't grow up in a time period where you could take a picture and edit it on the fly. And I don't know if you did. Those of you who are teens today, you understand that. So you really have multiple generations looking at this going, okay, I remember when you just got what you got. And now you're having teenagers who say, well, I don't want to get what I get. I want to get what I want to get, not what I just get. And so what do you want to get? And I thought this was quite interesting. Of course, the article itself, I will share it to the show notes, but those of you who will go in and read it, please be aware that it is not a Christian-based article. It is written and includes descriptions of people that are fitting with our cultural concepts, such as non-binary and things along those lines. So you're just going to have to kind of look at that and deal with that. But here's what I thought was interesting. It says, many in the public are aiming to move away from ideas of modern society considers antiquated, and it talks about that there's a harm that is happening. Social media have simultaneously narrowed what people consider beautiful. Study authors add technology has created an entire generation of young people who feel like they're constantly under a microscope. That doesn't surprise me. When you really start talking about people who believe that their lives are constantly being picked apart, or the next post that they put out there, that it could have consequences far beyond just whether or not people like their picture or not. But what this article brings out is this, that we have a cultural concept of what is beautiful, and then we have the reality of how people look. And so if you get on social media and see a picture that portrays reality, then our fact of the matter is this, that our society says we would rather deal with doctored pictures than with reality. And so people lighten their skin tone. They change the lighting. They whiten their teeth. Perhaps they will add a filter. And all of that's playing out to say this, look, in all of this society where you don't like what you look like, or at least you don't want to portray what you actually look like, that it's a reflection of self-image issues. So in other words, society has a belief of beauty. I don't fit that definition, therefore I don't want to portray myself. And even what they're saying is it's not just like changing lighting and coloring skin tone. We're talking about people who will go in and they will reshape their jawline, or they will reshape their nose, or they will reposition their eyes, almost to the extent I would conclude that when you look at the picture, you're really not even looking at who they are. Why would our young people, 9 out of 10 young women, why is there that pressure? And the only thing I can go back to is this. It's because society has ingrained a concept of beauty. Now, why do I address the concept of eating disorders amongst teens and then the self-image problems relayed through social media? It is because through all of this, we have seen an uptick in depression. We have seen an uptick in anxiety. And unfortunately, our young people are struggling to deal with it. And here's what's real. Sometimes we as adults struggle to deal with it. Look, there's a lot of uncertainty. What's going to happen? When is it going to stop? When are the masks going to be over? Will we develop herd immunity? When can people go back to school? Look, I talked to somebody this last week that her children have not been in a school setting for a full year. They've been in virtual, but they haven't been in a physical school setting. So the questions are, when is all this going to stop? When is it all going to change? And unfortunately, I can't give you that answer. And you can't give that answer to your kids. And teens, nobody can answer that for you. And so here's the dilemma. We've got to learn how to deal with the uncertainties. We've got to learn how to deal with the realities of anxiety. And of course, it's real easy for me to say, hey, if you'll just dump it all on God, He's big enough to take it, so don't worry about it. Well, the truth is this. He is all of that. And yes, I firmly believe that that's where ultimately we can lay our burdens and our cares. Prayer life is absolutely the answer. Bible study, I do believe, is the answer. But here's the deal. Some of these issues go beyond me, and they go beyond my expertise. That's why counselors are seeing an increase in their caseload as it pertains to young people dealing with the unknowns. Here's what I've always said. Whether or not everybody will agree with me or not, I don't know. But here's what I've always said. How do you deal with the unknowns of life? You go back to what you do know. How do I deal with the uncertainties? I go back to what I know. And here's what I know. I am worth something, not because other people say I am. I am worth something because God says I am. That's point number one. Point number two is this. God is the giver of all things good, and He doesn't cease being that during times of pandemic. So can God bless me during the pandemic? And the answer is yes. The reality is this. God did create us to be community people. And so we need people. But perhaps we're turning to the wrong set of people. I'm not suggesting that you are. I'm saying perhaps we are. Maybe this time was a time for our families to grow closer. And I know what you're saying. Look, Joe, not every family is close and not every child perhaps is safe at home. Those, I believe, are the exception, not the rule. And so I can't paint that broad picture. But what I can do is this. During that time, I can go back to what I do know. And what I do know is this. My family is a blessing to me. Now, I would offer this to you. I can also go back to a few other things. When I do have worry and anxiety and I start to feel like those clouds of depression are centering around me and settling in, then I can go talk to people. There are professionals that are willing to help and Christian-based professionals that can help. And so I want to offer that and throw that out there as well. And of course, if you're watching this tonight, you're listening to this when the podcast is released. If you have questions about that, where can you turn? Reach out to us. We'll do our best to connect you to somebody who is a professional in that field that maybe you can talk to. And if it's not directly there in your setting, perhaps it's somebody who you could speak with online. I know some really good counselors who approach subjects from a biblical worldview that could help you. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about tonight. I know it's not an in-depth and a great revelation when it comes to the show, but it is something that we are noticing from the time of the pandemic that's having an impact in our culture and upon our young people. And of course, we want to help. We want to help people be rooted and grounded that their identity, their worth, their value comes from God. Not by what they look like, not by what their picture is, but those are symptoms of a bigger problem. The bigger problem is we're struggling. Our teens are struggling. Perhaps our adults are struggling, and it's manifesting itself in multiple ways. And all of it goes back to I need to be rooted and grounded, my worth, my value in God. And that's what I want us to stick with today. So I'm sorry if you encountered technical difficulties. I believe the show continued on. If not, the audio will be out on Thursday at the lightnetwork.tv. You can check it out there. But we do, again, want to thank the lightnetwork.tv for allowing the Hey Joe Show to be a part of that family of podcasts. And we encourage you to check out the other podcasts that are there. Check out truth.fm, check out Kyle Publications online, and we want to encourage you to check out our YouTube channel as well. There's a lot of options that are out there on our YouTube channel, and also there's a link or a share to the family devotional page, which we really need to kick up and do more of those. But either way, there's plenty of resources, Kyle Publications, trying to do our part. But that's all that we have tonight. We want to thank you for tuning in, and obviously we wish you a good night, and God bless.